her there tells James they ought to prevent she issues that in the event that they don't a few loopy man or woman would possibly choose her. Up rather James hesitates however finally pulls over because the girl's strategy she introduces herself as Bonnie. There may be something unsettling approximately her however Alyssa ignorant of the threat invitations her to get in. Bonnie had been stalking them for a long term. She had even blackmailed them without them understanding. The instant they escaped from the tow yard she rushed in advance and located herself on the street understanding they could prevent earlier than moving into. She discreetly punctures one of the motor's tires with a pointy knife hidden in her bag, then performing harmless she slides into the returned seat. James and Alyssa stay ignorant of what she has simply executed. Bonnie stays absolutely silent during the journey, making James experience uneasy. Her presence is heavy and her quietness feels planned. Alyssa on the alternative hand is involved. If Bonnie became clearly by myself with inside the center of the woods, something horrible should have took place to her. However, in Bonnie's thoughts best one aspect topics she believes those deliberately killed Professor Clive simply then they recognize the automobile has damaged down. The tire is absolutely flat. James examines and realizes the spare tire became already used, leaving them stranded. Alyssa steps away to alleviate herself at the same time as Bonnie takes the threat to manage the state of affairs. She tells James she's thirsty and asks him to test if there may be water within inside the vehicle. As James searches she silently prepares to assault simply as she's approximately to make her pass. Alyssa returns forcing Bonnie to prevent. Alyssa notices smoke growing within inside the distance. It may be a eating place or a few form of refuge without another preference. The three of them start dragging the automobile in that course on the refuge. The resort proprietor greets them warmly. The location seems vintage however respectable, sufficient for a night's live. James heads directly to the restroom at the same time as Alyssa, beaten by the entirety, comes to a decision to book rooms, one for herself and James and the alternative for Bonnie, but they do not have sufficient cash. Bonnie steps in supplying to pay. She insists it is her manner of thanking them for giving her a journey. Alyssa hesitates however finally concurs. Bonnie's gesture appears pleasant however there may be something unsettling approximately it as they input the room. Alyssa notices there may be best an unmarried mattress. James feels a touch glad in her however Alyssa appears harassed and uncertain of what to do. The state of affairs feels awkward and she or he hesitates for a second, attempting to interrupt the silence. James' feedback on how first class the inn is. His eyes wander to the wall beside the door wherein sharp and pointed stag horns are hooked up as key holders. In her room Bonnie attempts to acquire self-assurance, gripping the gun tightly, making plans how she can be able to confront them and take revenge for her lover. However, earlier than she will act, Alyssa and James knock on her door. They endorse that they need to all loosen up and feature a drink collectively as they take a seat down and drink. Gus, the inn proprietor, seems he appears determined and assumes Bonnie is on my own on the grounds that James and Alyssa appear like a married couple. He makes a circulate on her. However, Alyssa speedy steps in and chews him away. In the meantime, James and Alyssa begin noticing Bonnie's conduct. She maintains consuming closely, dropping herself with inside the second to them she abruptly appears innocent, perhaps even a touch candy. However, they haven't any concept what is absolutely occurring in her thoughts. Alyssa sits there misplaced in idea, recollections of her wedding ceremony rushing. Again she regrets how she left the whole lot in the back of her mom, the visitors only for this she had slightly any cash, and made a reckless selection. The burden of all of it unsettles her, so she receives up and leaves. In the meantime Bonnie maintains consuming, excessively drowning in her personal feelings. James watches for some time however then makes a decision to depart whilst he returns to the room. Alyssa is already there. She stands there feeling conflicted, figuring out how she has harassed James together along with her actions. Later they take a seat down collectively, consuming once more. The anxiety among them lingers, then Alyssa abruptly expresses a choice to kiss. They inch nearer and without some other phrase they deliver into the instant, sharing a deep kiss on the opposite side. Gus over again makes a circulate on Bonnie, supplying her a drink. This time he intentionally spikes it with a sedative. Bonnie, unaware, takes a sip. Gus, being extraordinarily lonely and determined, watches her carefully, watching for the drug to take impact, but Bonnie senses something off. She notices the manner Gus is calling at her, his intentions clean without a phrase. She makes a decision to depart earlier than something takes place. She stands up and walks away, leaving him in the back of annoyed and on my own. Bonnie remains in her room whilst Gus barges in without knocking, pretending to be there for room service. He casually sits at the mattress and begins unzipping his pants, his desperation apparent. Bonnie, disgusted and enraged right now, pulls out the gun she had together along with her, aiming it at him. Gus panics, elevating his hand, stammering that he'll go away. However, earlier than he can circulate, the sedative begins evolved, taking impact, making Bonnie experience lightheaded. Her grip at the gun loosens, and as she places it at the aspect desk, it slips and falls to the ground. The effect units off a shot that hits Gus instantly with inside the head, passing via the loud gunshot startles James and Alyssa with inside a different room. Simply as they had been getting nearer, misplaced with inside. The second they iced up, Alyssa immediately pulls away, her expression converting guilt washes over her, and he or she reminds James that they shouldn't be doing this. She hesitates earlier than asking him if he could sleep with inside the lavatory as an alternative. James, even though disillusioned, is of the same opinion without argument. As Bonnie stumbles backward from the gunshot, she crashes towards the wall wherein the set-up stag horns are. One of the sharp antlers pierces her, inflicting a deep wound. Dizzy from the sedative and ache, she collapses onto Gus's useless frame and loses focus. In the meantime, James lies wakeful with inside the lavatory, hoping that matters among him and Alyssa will eventually training session. However, Alyssa, sitting at the mattress, is misplaced an idea, regretting the whole lot that simply occurred. The following morning, Bonnie wakes up and unearths herself mendacity on pinnacle of Gus's useless frame. Stunned, she attempts to remember the activities of the preceding night time. In the meantime, Alyssa is misplaced an idea, reflecting on what occurred, even as James appears thrilled, replaying the nighttime in his thoughts. Neither of them has slept tons. Whilst James steps out of the room, he notices Alyssa is lacking and follows her. Alyssa, however, heads to the reception to get something to consume, however unearths no one there. Suspicious, they determine to test Bonnie's room interior. Bonnie hurriedly stuffs Gus's frame into the cloth cabinet. Simply. Then James asks Bonnie for a few cash to repair the automobile. She is of the same opinion and is going interior to get it. As she leaves, James jokingly tells Alyssa that Bonnie won't be by myself. They snort, assuming she had a terrific time with Gus, remaining nighttime ignorant of the fact. They take the cash and depart. James receives the automobile repaired, even as Alyssa stays unsettled, sensing that something approximately this vicinity is not proper. The three of them get returned into the automobile and keep their adventure, even as driving. James asks Bonnie wherein she desires to be dropped off. She mentions that her sister's residence is close by. He is of the same opinion and drives in the course. In the meantime, Bonnie secretly takes Alyssa's wedding ceremony headband and hides it in her bag. All at once, she begins evolved, feeling sick. The mind of the preceding nighttime weigh down her, and he or she rushes out of the automobile to vomit. James, however, maintains, mentioning the activities of the nighttime, attempting to speak to Alyssa approximately it. However, she shuts him down whenever fast converting the subject, making it clean she would not need to speak about it. Bonnie all at once says she urgently wishes to go to a chemist, so that they take her there. As soon as interior, she begins evolved shopping for a variety of painkillers and different scientific substances. The chemist notices the blood on her and realizes something horrific need to have took place to her. He tells Bonnie that he's a feminist and desires to assist her, asking if she desires to speak approximately whatever. However, she refuses to mention whatever. Alternatively, she asks wherein the bathroom is and is going interior on my own. With inside the washroom, she begins evolved bandaging her wound. Whilst doing so, she locations the gun there and keeps tending to her damage, focusing on cleansing up the mess. In the meantime, Alyssa tells James to test why Bonnie hasn't back, but while James is going interior, the chemist, assuming James is answerable for Bonnie's situation, subtly accuses him. He suggests that Bonnie would possibly have been harmed via way of means of a person and refuses to mention whatever else. James, careworn and pissed off, insists that Bonnie is here. However, the chemist denies it. James walks slower back out of doors and tells Alyssa that the chemist claims Bonnie become by no means there. and has disappeared simply. Then Bonnie all at once seems at the back of them, appearing regular. She casually says she's starving. Dismissing any issues and not using a different choice, they determine to visit a close-by eating place. As soon as interior, they order meals and begin consuming as though not anything took place. James begins a valved speaking approximately the rotating desk on the eating place, looking to keep the temper mild. Then he casually asks Bonnie approximately her boyfriend. At the beginning she avoids the query, however finally she famous that he become murdered. The phrase homicide straight away triggers Alyssa's recollections of Professor Clive and the whole lot that took place to him. Her expression darkens and frustration builds up interior her without explaining a good deal. She all at once says they ought to get the meals packed alternatively and consume at the manor. She appears stressed, keen to go away. Now no longer looking to argue, they quick get the meals to head and go away the eating place. All at once Bonnie recalls that she left the gun with inside the restroom. Panic rushes via her, and without losing a second she hurries lower back. As she reaches the restroom her coronary heart sinks. There may be no gun. Determined, she storms as much as the pharmacist and without delay asks if he took it. He stays calm, looking to purpose together along with her. He says he knows that something horrible took place to her, however violence isn't always the answer. He assures her that he hasn't referred to as the police and really desires to assist. However, Bonnie isn't always interested by his sympathy. Her eyes darken as she pulls out a knife from her pocket, pointing it at him. Her voice is bloodless and corporation. She wishes her gun lower back. Worry spreads throughout the pharmacist's face. His palms shake as he quick retrieves the gun and palms it over. The sheer terror of the instant receives to him and he loses manage. His pants get wet. Bonnie snatches the gun, tucks it away, and without any other phrase rushes out. In the meantime James in the end gathers the braveness to invite Alyssa why she's been appearing so bloodless towards him, particularly when they kissed. Her reaction is sharp. Easy, sorry, should repair the whole lot. James sigh, understanding she's proper. He admits that matters might not magically turn out to be okay, and it is now no longer pretty much her. He has been through hell too. He turned into worried in the whole lot, and he slightly made it out alive. Alyssa coldly tells him that something that they'd is long gone. There's not anything left among them. Without announcing whatever greater, he is taking Bonnie's meals and leaves it on the street. Then without searching again he drives off to drop Alyssa domestic, while Bonnie steps out of doors and sees they deserted her like that. A wave of anger and surprise rushes through her. James drops Alyssa close to her domestic while she steps in. Her guilt weighs heavy on her. She apologizes to her mother and aunt for the whole lot she did and guarantees to pay again all of the wedding ceremony fees. She feels ashamed for the way matters grew to become out her aunt, but maintains it easy. She simply tells her to head straight and now no longer to problem her mom an excessive amount of. In the meantime Bonnie takes a taxi again to the woodland in which she had parked her automobile. She swallows a few painkillers to numb her wounds. Then without losing any time she begins a valved heading closer to Alyssa's residence on the opposite facet and Lee tactics James and tells him that he cannot simply park there all the time. He desires to transport on, however he feels misplaced, admitting that he has nowhere else to head. She then brings up his father's ashes, mentioning that he cannot convey them round all the time. This makes him pause. He confesses that he does not understand in which to scatter them. Lee indicates an area in which his dad and mom first met. Something clicks in his thoughts for the primary time, and sometime he seems like he has a motive once more with his selection. Sooner or later made he leaves the whole lot at the back of and units off as soon as greater. On the opposite facet Alyssa meets her husband Todd, who's sitting on a chair with inside the wood. She apologizes, however he is already disillusioned. Seeking to calm matters down, Todd tells her that he's constructing a residence for them, an area in which they can begin clean. However, Alyssa all at once says she wishes a divorce. She admits she is not mentally organized for marriage. Todd's frustration grows. He cannot recognize why she's announcing this now. In spite of everything, she turned into the only who agreed to the wedding ceremony. Alyssa beaten apologizes, once more announcing the whole lot feels too difficult and she or he does not understand what to do, as James is sooner or later shifting on and using again. He all at once spots Bonnie dashing closer to Alyssa's residence. Idea moves him. Why Might she ask for a boost in advance if she already had an automobile and she or he by no means went to her sister's vicinity? So why is she heading closer to Alyssa now? Issue creeps in and James cannot shake off the sensation that something is inaccurate without losing time. He turns his automobile round and begins a vault following Bonnie. In the meantime, Bonnie reaches Alyssa's residence and asks her mom approximately her whereabouts. Her mom, blind to Bonnie's intentions, tells her Alyssa isn't always domestic. James, looking from a distance, grows extra aggravating due to the fact they by no means advised her. Alyssa's deal with his problem deepens and he is aware of he has to act rapid. Bonnie drives lower back and parks close to Alyssa's residence, awaiting her go back. While Alyssa ultimately arrives, James stays hidden, gazing as Bonnie silently stalks her within the cafe. Alyssa is reducing veggies while she by accident cuts her finger. The sight of blood brings lower back flashes of Professor Clive's beyond horrors in her thoughts misplaced in the one's mind she slightly notices while a co-worker requests to depart early given that it is now no longer too busy. She is of the same opinion, announcing she'll control the whole thing by myself. Looking from out of doors, Bonnie feels a feel of pleasure with the cafe now empty. She grabs her gun and heads towards Alyssa. In her different hand she clutches Alyssa's wedding ceremony headband. James follows intently in the back of his coronary, heart pounding as Bonnie steps within the cafe performing fast. He opens her automobile and unearths Professor Clive's book in her. Flipping through it, his eyes land on an autograph in which Clive has written that he loves Bonnie deeply. The whole thing clicks and James' thoughts panic rushes through him as he realizes Alyssa is in actual danger. Without losing a 2D, he slams the auto door close and rushes towards the cafe, his fear intensifying with each step. Bonnie enters the cafe and walks instantly to Alyssa, announcing she's there to go back her headband. Alyssa, amazed, asks how she determined her deal with Bonnie lies, announcing James advised her looking to live calm. Alyssa gives her a drink, partially to be well-mannered and partially to preserve the state of affairs below. Manage. Bonnie is of the same opinion, her expression unreadable. James sneaks across the lower back of the cafe, attempting to find a manner in her as he peeks and his eyes widen due to the fact Bonnie has a gun. Determined, he attempts to name 911, however the connection is horrible. His voice continues breaking and the officer at the different stop struggles to recognize him. Frustration builds as he realizes he is walking out of time. Bonnie continues urgent Alyssa, approximately the beyond disturbing to recognize what in reality befell that nighttime. Bonnie pulls the gun from below the desk and locations them on Pinnacle. Alyssa ultimately asks if she turned into the only who dispatched the bullets. Bonnie admits it, then needs to recognize how she and James killed Professor Clive. Alyssa, looking to live calm, explains that they're by no means supposed to kill him. She is going over the whole thing that they destroy and how they have been simply children, after which Clive unexpectedly seemed in the bedroom. She describes how he closed the door and attempted to attack her. Bonnie's expression darkens. She refuses to accept as true with it, insisting Alyssa is mendacity. Earlier than the anxiety escalates. Similarly, a police automobile pulls up. Bonnie stiffens, panic flashing in her eyes. She right away turns to Alyssa, disturbing to recognize why the police are there. Alyssa fast grabs his radio and sends out an emergency name. Bonnie, with anger and heartbreak in her voice, needs to recognize why they killed Professor Mom, approximately her whereabouts. Her mom, blind to Bonnie's intentions, tells her Alyssa is not domestic. James, looking from a distance, grows extra hectic due to the fact they in no way instructed her. Alyssa's deal with his challenge deepens and he is aware of he has to act speedy. Bonnie drives lower back and parks close to Alyssa's residence, looking forward to her go back. Whilst Alyssa in the end arrives, James stays hidden, gazing as Bonnie silently stalks her within the cafe. Alyssa is cutting veggies whilst she by accident cuts her finger. The sight of blood brings lower back flashes of Professor Clive's beyond horrors in her thoughts misplaced in is of the same opinion, pronouncing she'll control the entirety on my own. Looking from outdoor, Bonnie feels an experience of pride with the cafe Now empty, she grabs her gun and heads towards Alyssa. In her different hand she clutches Alyssa's wedding ceremony headband. James follows carefully in the back of his coronary, heart pounding as Bonnie steps within the cafe performing fast. He opens her automobile and reveals Professor Clive's e-book in her. Flipping through it, his eyes land on an autograph in which Clive has written that he loves Bonnie deeply. The entirety clicks and James' thoughts panic rushes through him as he realizes Alyssa is in actual danger. Without losing a second, he slams the auto door close and rushes towards the cafe, his fear intensifying with each step. Bonnie enters the cafe and walks instantly to Alyssa, pronouncing she's there to go back her headband. Alyssa, amazed, asks how she observed her deal with Bonnie, lies, pronouncing James instructed her, seeking to live calm. Alyssa gives her a drink, in part to be well-mannered and in part to maintain the scenario beneath manage. Bonnie is of the same opinion, her expression unreadable. James sneaks across the lower back of the cafe, attempting to find a manner in her. As he peeks in, his eyes widen due to the fact Bonnie has a gun. Determined, he attempts to name 911, however the connection is horrible. His voice continues breaking and the officer at the different give up struggles to recognize him. Frustration builds as he realizes he is walking out of time. Bonnie continues. Urgent. Alyssa, approximately the beyond annoying to recognize what certainly occurred that nighttime. Bonnie pulls the gun from beneath the desk and locations them on Pinnacle. Alyssa in the end asks if she turned into the only who dispatched the bullets. Bonnie admits it, then needs to recognize how she and James killed Professor Clive. Alyssa, seeking to live calm, explains that they in no way supposed to kill him. She is going over the entirety that they reckon how they had been simply youngsters, after which Clive abruptly seemed in the bedroom. She describes how he closed the door and attempted to attack her. Bonnie's expression darkens. She refuses to consider it, insisting Alyssa is mendacity. Earlier than the anxiety escalates. Similarly, a police automobile pulls up. Bonnie stiffens, panic flashing in her eyes. She at once turns to Alyssa, annoying to recognize why the police are there. Alyssa, Todd's residence, knocking anxiously. He asks if she has come through, however Todd shakes his head. James feels a sinking dread. What if she's completed something to herself? Then a reminiscence moves him. Alyssa, as soon as informed Bonnie that she had continually felt trapped in that rental and that equal bedroom, his intestine tells him she would possibly have long gone there. In the meantime, Alyssa arrives at the deserted residence of Professor Clive. The area is up on the market now, stripped of the whole lot, but it nonetheless holds the weight of all she has been through. Steeling herself, she steps into the bedroom. The silence presses and reminiscences flooding lower back, and earlier than she will be able to prevent it dares spill over. However, after a second she gathers herself, pushing beyond the feelings she makes her manner out of door status at the threshold of the empty swimming pool, climbs in, letting herself sink into the reminiscences. She has been jogging from James, speeds through the streets, his heart pounding as he heads towards Clive's vintage residence. Pulling up, he rushes in her, his eyes scanning the empty area till they land on Alyssa's jacket. Alleviation and tension hit him on the equal time. He calls out her call. A second later she solutions. His chest loosens as he unearths her status there, secure however soaking wet. Harassed, he asks why she's moist. She casually replies that she went swimming. James exhales, nonetheless shaken. Then, remembering the word she left, he questions her approximately at why had she written for Aunt Lee to attend to him. The phrases had scared him. Alyssa peers at him, knowing how plenty he's panicked. She softly apologizes, explaining that she by no means supposed to make him fear like that, after which, as though sensing what he would possibly have feared, she firmly assures him irrespective of what occurs she can be able to by no means take her personal existence. Each stroll to a gap underneath a bridge in which James in the end scatters his father's ashes. He explains that this area was once a park, the very spot in which his mother and father first met. As he releases the ashes, he watches in mild wonder as they grow to be damp from the moisture within the air. After a second, Alyssa breaks the quiet, announcing she's hungry. They discover a small roadside open cafe. As they devour, she hesitates, earlier than mentioning something from the beyond that Day out of doors the tow yard. She had heard what he stated. James pretends now no longer to recall, however she is aware of he does. He had stated he cherished her. She admits that she feels the equal manner. James would not react an excessive amount of at the floor, however inner happiness swells in him. Alyssa then says she wishes time to get better. James listens to the whole lot, nodding alongside without hesitation. For him something she says is okay, then without a phrase Alyssa places her quid his. James smiles. They take a seat down like that, the instant stretching between them, sitting on a bench overlooking the mountains in non-violent silence. The season comes.